Hey, welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, Hunter Biden is convicted in his gun case.
Meanwhile, Hamas accepts a ceasefire proposal.
And Arizona seizes a massive haul of fentanyl at the southern border. Well, the verdict is finally in for Hunter Biden, and earlier today, a Delaware jury found the president's son guilty on all 3 counts for lying on a federal gun application about his drug addiction back in 2018. His father, President Biden, has promised not to pardon his son. He released a statement saying, quote, "I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal." Hunter now faces up to 25 years in prison and fines as high as $750,000 on these charges, though most legal experts believe he will likely receive a much lighter sentence as he is a first-time offender.
I don't think he really has any record to speak of, and he's not somebody who was trying to obtain the weapon in order to commit other crimes. It's the lowest level of the sentencing guidelines, and I think the judge may be able to have it calculated so low that it's a non-jail sentence.
That was National Review's Andy McCarthy giving his opinion there. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is surprisingly coming to Hunter's defense in this case. Following the verdict, Trump released a statement promising to quote-unquote save Hunter if reelected, saying it is hard to blame him for wanting a gun, which he has a God-given right to have under the Second Amendment. At the same time, Hunter also faces tax charges in California as well, the trial for which is set to take place this September.
Meanwhile, on the other side, Trump completed his pre-sentencing interview for his New York hush money conviction yesterday. The New York Times reports that probation officers virtually interviewed the former president at his Mar-a-Lago estate. He was joined by his lawyer, Todd Blanche. Here's criminal defense lawyer Robert Kiva explaining what this legal procedure is.
So the way this ordinarily works is a defendant goes in, they meet with somebody from probation, they complete, various states call them different things, but we call it a pre-sentence report, a PSR, which is an interview between the defendant and the probation officer, the person doing the PSR. And that's supposed to be an independent analysis and assessment for what an appropriate sentence is.
According to the lawyer, Trump's legal team would, of course, not recommend any jail time for the former president, and they would likely only recommend a very light probation. According to CNN, Trump was described as polite, respectful, and accommodating to the probation officers. Judge Merchant scheduled the sentencing on July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention, and that is where Trump is expected to be nominated as the official presidential candidate for the upcoming elections.
And the battle over President Biden's recorded interview is escalating as the House Rules Committee is now considering a contempt resolution today against Attorney General Merrick Garland for his ongoing refusal to hand over audio files of Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. This, of course, was that interview which led to Hur to ultimately describe Biden as having a very poor memory. The House GOP is seeking those files as part of a much larger impeachment probe into the president. A full House vote could be held as early as tomorrow if the resolution today is approved. It comes only days after a heated hearing where Republicans accused Garland of targeting former President Donald Trump.
Meanwhile, the Rolling Stone, which is known for writing political hit pieces on conservatives, published an undercover interview with Justice Samuel Alito, allegedly confessing to his radical ideals. Progressive journalist Lauren Windsor posed as a conservative at a Supreme Court dinner to get Alito to admit that he is biased in his rulings. Apparently, Alito admitting that either one side or the other will win the political war is considered partial judgment.
You know, as a Catholic and as someone who really cherishes my faith, I don't know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. I think one side or the other is going to win. I don't know.
Another so-called bombshell moment happened when Alito agreed with Windsor that the country should return to godliness, allegedly proving that he mixes religion with judicial rulings.
And that's what I'm saying. I think that the solution really is like winning the moral argument. Like, people in this country who believe in God have got to keep fighting for that, to return our country to a place of godliness.
Oh, I agree with you.
Meanwhile, Alito's colleague John Roberts pushed back on Windsor's probing questions by saying that it is up to the people to elect leaders who could put the country on a more moral path. The justice's job is to decide the cases the best they can.
And actually, that's something Alito said later in the interview, because they said, well, what can we do? What can the Supreme Court do to help?
Right.
And he specifically said, well, you know, the Supreme Court has a very limited role here. This is largely up to the American people as well.
Right. I think the Rolling Stone was really hoping for like a big gotcha moment, but they never got it.
It seems like the big gotcha is that the Catholic conservative justice is a Catholic conservative in real life.
Very true.
Very surprising. Elsewhere, a new videotape also shows former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi allegedly taking responsibility for security failures on January 6th. House GOP investigators released that video yesterday, showing Pelosi speaking with her chief of staff while being driven away from the Capitol. Take a look.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
According to Just the News, the footage you saw there was recorded by Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra, who was helping HBO shoot a documentary about the riot on that day. House Republicans argue this video undercuts Democrat claims that Donald Trump was solely responsible for the failures on January 6th. All right, with all that, we'll get into international news when we come back from this short break. Stay tuned.
Fear and uncertainty can cause us to hold things tightly and rely on ourselves. But during uncertain times, as believers in Christ, we are called to surrender fully to our sovereign God. The call to surrender to Jesus is one step in our growth in holiness. And it doesn't just mean you give over a few things. It means He gets it all, including our finances, our investments. Learn a biblically responsible investment strategy proven over 25 years. Keep the money God has entrusted to you out of companies that participate in things that God detests. Fully surrender. Become a Financial Issues Partner today. Learn more by going to financialissues.org/join. That's financialissues.org/join.
Saving the unborn is one of the most amazing things that we can do in this day and age. Hi, my name is Shanna Burt, host of Financial Issues. Would you go to preborn.org right now? Consider giving $140. That will allow 5 young mothers to hear the heartbeat of their baby and change their mind to choose life over abortion. Go to preborn.org. That's preborn.org. It's an incredible ministry, Preborn. We're fighting back through saving tens of thousands of lives. And Preborn doesn't just save the baby. They ask these young mothers to go through a program of evangelism so that their eternal lives might be saved as well. Would you come alongside us for the kingdom, for the glory of Christ? Go to preborn.org. That's preborn.org.
Hey there, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We turn now to the war in the Middle East, where there's some major controversy. Israel is now demanding answers from news outlet Al Jazeera, wanting to know why one of their own reporters was holding hostages at his home in Gaza. Israel alleges journalist Abdallah Jamal, along with a prominent Palestinian doctor, were holding captive 3 hostages who were freed in the IDF's weekend rescue operation. This journalist has been listed as an author on Al Jazeera's website. Al Jazeera denies he was an official employee, but they did say he worked as a freelancer in the past. Former IDF spokesman Jonathan Conricus says the fact a journalist was holding hostages should serve as a wake-up call to Western news outlets.
I'm sure that many of things that he has written has been sourced by Western media, perhaps more than once. And I think that also calls into question the veracity of a lot of the reporting coming out of Palestinian journalists. I'm not to say that everything that comes out of Palestinian reporters is a lie or is fabricated, but I'm saying that as we hear news from Gaza, we have to treat it with a lot of healthy skepticism, because a jailer of Israeli civilians also doubled as a journalist.
Al Jazeera is temporarily banned in Israel for right now, accusing it of spreading propaganda and also giving intel to Hamas. Meanwhile, more disturbing, this sadly isn't the first time the IDF found civilians holding hostages in their home, thereby revealing the rather blurry line between Hamas terrorists and civilians in Gaza.
There is a tremendous support of the civilian population for all of the military activities that Hamas does. This is another such example, but a few months ago, Israel was able to rescue 2 Israeli men from the southern city of Rafah. They were also held in civilian apartments, and they were also jailed and guarded by Palestinian civilians, not even Hamas families, not related to Hamas, but they were paid money, and they did that job for Hamas.
Meanwhile, the international community continues to press Hamas and Israel to accept a ceasefire deal. FISM's Ian Patrick gives us an update on a ceasefire deal in the United Nations.
The United Nations has officially backed a U.S. ceasefire proposal in Gaza, but it remains to be seen if the ceasefire will actually go anywhere. On Monday, the UN Security Council voted to back the proposal, which was presented by President Joe Biden. And Biden laid out the general ideas behind this ceasefire during press remarks on May 31st.
This new proposal has 3 phases. 3. The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase 2, which is a permanent end to hostilities. If the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, for phase 1, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue. Finally, in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families.
Now, the resolution was put before the UN Security Council and passed with 14 out of 15 votes. Russia was the only nation to abstain from voting, saying that it did not, that being the resolution, specify Israel's agreements well enough. But other members, which supported the ceasefire, said it did represent a good chance at peace in the region. Now, prior to the resolution passing, U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken was visiting Middle Eastern leaders with regards to the ceasefire. At the time, Blinken said that the biggest link in the chain of making the ceasefire work was getting Hamas to cooperate.
The only party that's not said yes is Hamas. That's who everyone's waiting on. That's who the Palestinians in Gaza are waiting on. It's who the Israelis are waiting on. It's who the hostages and the hostage families are waiting on.
But according to Hamas leadership, they appear to be on board with the terms. Senior Hamas official Sami Abu Suri said on Tuesday that the terrorist group accepts the ceasefire proposal and stands ready to negotiate, while saying that the real test is convincing Israel to cooperate. Now, despite that statement, both Qatari and Egyptian mediators say they are still waiting for a formal acceptance from Hamas, as well as one from Israel. Now, Israel has not beat around the bush with regards to its overall goals concerning the war. During the day of the resolution vote, Israeli UN diplomat Raut Shapir Ben Naftali said that Israel remained committed to freeing the hostages, destroying any militaristic and governing capabilities of Hamas, and ensuring that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel in the future. These commitments have previously scuttled negotiations on other ceasefire deals as Israel and Hamas could not really come to terms. However, one senior Israeli government official did say that this new ceasefire proposal would apparently enable Israel to achieve its war goals, so we'll have to wait and see how negotiations fare. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
We'll continue to follow all those updates with the ceasefire. Speaking of the UN, meanwhile, their World Food Program is pausing aid deliveries to that Gaza American-built pier, citing safety concerns following one of the deadliest days of the war so far. Director Cindy McCain says 2 warehouses were struck on Saturday, injuring one of their workers.
Right now we're paused because I'm concerned about the safety of our people after the incidents yesterday. We also, 2 of our warehouses, the warehouse complex, were rocketed yesterday. So we've stepped back just for the moment to make sure that we're on safe terms and on safe ground before we'll restart. But the rest of the country is operational.
Now, this, of course, is just the latest obstacle for the pier, which recently had to be repaired due to storm damage. The U.S., meanwhile, says deliveries will be securely stockpiled until operations resume.
Meanwhile, the U.S. consulate was attacked in Australia yesterday. The suspect used a sledgehammer to break the windows of the Sydney-based building and sprayed anti-Israel graffiti on its front doors. 9 windows were reportedly damaged. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese quickly condemned the vandalism, saying that achieving political outcomes must be done through debate and discussions, not by committing crimes. Images from the scene show inverted red triangles painted on the building's doors, which, according to CBC News, are signs used by Hamas to identify Israeli military targets. The suspect is still on the run, and law enforcement is currently investigating the situation.
And finally, ending with our international news today in Europe, where new polling shows the rise of right-wing parties is being fueled mainly by many of the same issues we see here in the U.S. Over the weekend, right-wing populist parties saw major victories in the EU's parliamentary elections, and new polling recently seen by Reuters shows the #1 issue on voters' minds over the weekend was improving the economy and reducing inflation. That was then followed by international conflict and war, and the third one, immigration and asylum seekers. The poll surveyed 6,000 people across Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, and Sweden. Those survey results largely mirror those in the U.S., where the economy, especially inflation, along with immigration, are consistently ranking as the top concerns this election cycle. Okay, and we have plenty more news to get to up next, but first, let's go to Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In this episode, let's go back to the Middle Ages and uncover one of the most famous kings in English history. His life is bolstered by legend, specifically the legends surrounding the lovable anti-hero Robin Hood. Truth be told, this man was not much of a king in the sense of a strong monarch at home, but he was a brilliant knight and warrior on the battlefield, especially in the battlefields of the Middle East during the Crusades. Let's explore the warrior king of England at the turn of the 12th century, Richard the Lionheart. Now, Richard's moniker comes from his brilliance and skill on the battlefield. He was, in fact, Richard I of England, son of King Henry II and Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was infamous in his early years for an attempted coup against his father. Now, remember, the relationship between England and France, and Richard held ties to both, was rocky at best and utterly contentious at worst. But Richard emerged among his brothers as the heir to the throne, and in 1189, Richard was crowned King of England. Now, as we said earlier, he was not much of a king. The reason for this is not any kind of abject moral failure as much as it was the simple fact that he was almost never in England during his reign. In 1187, Saladin the Muslim conqueror had retaken Jerusalem from the Christian Crusaders, and Richard's heart was set on the recapture of Jerusalem. So along with Frederick Barbarossa of Germany and Philip II of France, Richard led a mighty Christian force to the Holy Land. Now, of all the Crusades since the first, Richard's was by far the most successful. He was a brilliant military commander who led the recapture of much of the land surrounding Jerusalem that the Muslims had only just retaken in the late 12th century. He and Saladin clashed numerous times on the battlefield, and history reveals that they were both equally matched and also had a mutual respect for one another. But Richard ultimately failed in meeting his goal. He could not recapture the Holy City, and in 1192 he began the return journey to England. While on the way, he was captured in France and held for an enormous ransom at the time. Miraculously, it was paid off, and he returned briefly to England before leaving for war yet again. Richard died as he had lived most of his life, in battle trying to take a castle in France in 1199. He was mortally wounded and died at the age of 41, laid to rest in the Fontevraud Abbey Church in France. Thanks so much for joining me once again for a moment in history.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
When a woman experiences an unplanned pregnancy, she's faced with a difficult decision. Preborn connects with life-affirming pregnancy clinics across the nation and provides them with free ultrasound sessions for expectant mothers. When a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound and hears their heartbeat, it doubles the chance she'll choose life. Visit preborn.com/life to save a baby's life.
Welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue with our national coverage here. Arizona border officials continue to seize a record-breaking amount of drugs, weapons, and ammunition. Just the News reports that border officials are confiscating these items at the Mariposa border of entry in Arizona. Border agents seized over 3 million fentanyl pills in one load just this past month, which could have killed at least 2 million people. In two other outbound operations, officials seized over 70,000 rounds of ammunition, various weapons, and 18 magazines. Port Director Michael Humphrey said that the large amount of ammunition was most likely going to support cartel operations in Mexico. This comes as Border Patrol agents have arrested a record number of illegal immigrants in the past 2 years. Both this year and last year, Border Patrol agents have arrested around 29,000 illegal border crossers in Arizona.
At the same time that's going on, more and more Americans are getting fed up with illegal immigration, as a new CBS YouGov poll shows 62% of voters want the U.S. to deport all undocumented immigrants, including a third of Democrats supporting that idea, which has been long touted by Donald Trump.
On day one of my administration, I will terminate every open border policy of the Biden administration, and we will begin the largest domestic deportation operation in American history, because we have no choice. We have no choice.
According to that same poll, voters overwhelmingly believe Trump would do a better job closing the border than Biden. 70% of them say Trump's policies would decrease border crossings, compared to only 20% who said the same thing about Biden. In fact, 49% believe Biden's policies would increase border crossings, not lower them, while only 5% say Trump's policies would lead to more crossings.
And Republicans are toning down some of their hardliner policies in the pro-life arena. House GOP leaders announced yesterday that their spending bill will not include a ban on the abortion pills such as mifepristone. Last year, the FDA allowed abortion pills to be sold at pharmacies or by mail. The moderate Republican opinion comes out of the concern that it would negatively impact Republican candidates. Last year, these conservative ideals ended up losing Republicans almost half of their budget proposals. So this year they had to change their tactic. Once again, House Republicans plan to pass 12 spending bills, which they hope would give them more negotiating power with the Senate and the White House. Bipartisan talks will probably begin after Election Day, and the funding bills are set to expire on September 30th.
And Biden's re-elect campaign is committing full force to Pride Month this June. The campaign has now scheduled more than 200 stops at Pride events across 23 states, with a heavy focus specifically on those battleground states. It's a rather unsurprising move for the campaign, though, as President Biden has aggressively pushed pro-LGBT policies since his very first days in office, although some of his allies are currently concerned about flagging support among that demographic. Biden will give a keynote speech at a massive LGBT fundraiser in New York City at the end of the month, officially capping off his Pride Month blitz.
And speaking of Pride Month, Christian actor and activist Kirk Cameron announced that he's launching an event called See You at the Library to counter progressive culture. This comes as a continuation of his efforts with Brave Books last year.
We're now gathering at public libraries to sing the national anthem, to read wholesome books of virtue, and to pray. We are calling on families all across the nation to double what we did last year. And we want to see over 500 libraries, 600 libraries, all 50 states, and tens of thousands of people gathering to say that we want to return to the American constitutional and biblical values in public libraries.
Cameron explained that the event was prompted by concern over public Pride Month displays. Cameron said, quote, "We need courage, we need hope, we need faith, and that's what our movement is endeavoring to instill into the hearts of parents and grandparents so that they can raise their children." Cameron told Fox News that his event is scheduled for August 24th.
Very exciting to see indeed. Finally, we're going to end with this strange story today. The Olympics is now telling media outlets not to refer to transgender athletes by their biological sex. Their new guidelines, in fact, say it's harmful to refer to transgender athletes as biological males or females. Their guidelines then go on to say this can be dehumanizing and inaccurate when used for a transgender person. The blacklisted terms now include born male, born female, biologically male, and of course, biologically female. The Olympics also provided other guidelines for female athletics specifically, encouraging outlets not to compare female athletes to prominent male athletes. Instead, they're now asking outlets covering the Olympics to focus on discriminatory barriers to women and the so-called gender pay gap, which is very strange because it's acknowledging the stats difference between males and females, while then denying the reality when it comes to transgender competitors.
Yeah, I wonder if, I'm not really sure what their goal is with this. Like, will we see trans people competing against women? Or
that's what it seems like.
That's just so crazy. But anyways, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
Very strange times. For more updates, check us out on social media, and we'll see you tomorrow with more news coverage. Catch you then.